He comes across as very patriarchal. And a narcissist. I have to say this, but that's how it comes across. Like you said earlier on, Yasmin, if you were a non-Muslim and you wanted to convert to Islam, and that's something that you were, I would turn away. I'll be like, no, I thought Islam was about compassion, about loving one another, about community, support, and all, just beauty.
Yes.
But then I'm listening to this filled with anger, narcissism, misogynistic.
What I notice is that we're worrying too much about who's sleeping with who, who's having affairs with who, but we're focusing on the main issues, that are happening within our society, such as Maulanas. I will reiterate this: Maulanas and shuyukh who go and sleep with other men's wives, or even their madrasa students. They're only focused on a man having sex with another man, or a woman having sex with another woman, which to me it's insignificant. We have a lot of problems as Muslims that we should be sitting and dealing with, the likes of rapes that are happening in the madrasas. Such kind of things are the things that we should be actually putting our energies to.
We need to expose these people, and we have to get hold of them also, and the dawah should be strong, that we're not writing them off. If they left Islam, then we have to win back everyone, any person who's exited Islam. It is still our duty to take the dawah to them and win them back towards Islam. That is how a Muslim should be dealing with these matters.
They don't want to hear that you must recite Surah Yasin 10 times, you'll get better, or you must make tawbah, you must make istighfar. These are things that we constantly do as Muslims. But it's not going to solve the problem of your homosexuality. So imams need to learn that we need practical solutions. So I wanted to turn to this question about Qawm Lut, Sodom and Gomorrah. And I want to unpack it a little bit, because he mentions about the 7 different punishments that Allah has given them, and he makes it out as if all those 7 punishments was because of homosexual activities that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So I mean, I've mentioned this a couple of times in many different videos, but I think it's important to reiterate it, is that we have to make a distinction between innate homosexuality and constructed homosexuality. And I think this is where imams like these, they fail in understanding the difference between the two, because they've not done their homework, right? Innate homosexuality is as natural as innate heterosexuality. People don't choose to be heterosexual. They grow up, they discover their feelings and their emotions, whatever, and they see towards whom it is, and that is what determines their sexual orientation. It's exactly the same for a homosexual person, right? So that's innate homosexuality. And so if these things are innate, then means it's part of our fitrah, right? We can't undo it. We have to accept it, because it is how Allah has brought us into this world. What we do with that innate homosexuality becomes a different issue, right? So the same rubric that we have to protect our own chastity as straight people, it's the same rubric that we have to use for the chastity of the homosexual as well. So that's one point. When we look at the homosexuality in Sodom and Gomorrah, we see how constructed in nature that homosexuality was. And I'll give you 3 examples. The first one was the molestation that happens on the highways, right? The King's Highway. And the Quran specifically says one of the atrocities that they've committed was taqta'una sabil. They used to cut off the highway, right? And so one needs to go back into our history and see what really happened when they were cutting off these highways. There was robbery that happened, right? The Bible gives us a little bit more information around how they used to molest these men and then send them off in the desert naked. So that's kind of a death sentence, right? And so that kind of homosexuality was not consensual. It was clearly constructed. It was constructed around the idea of humiliation. It was constructed around the idea that they were a xenophobic society. They didn't want people to pass by Sodom and Gomorrah and use up their resources. Right? The second incident was the Sodom and Gomorrah had many gods, right? And one of the gods that was related to fertility, sexuality, war, and love is the goddess Ishtar. And so a lot of sexual activity went on in her temple, right? And one of the practices that these men who were running these temples, the Asinu, that they instituted was that anybody who comes to the temple of Ishtar has to engage in some form of sexual activity so that their fertility is given to Ishtar, and in turn Ishtar will make them fertile and their lands fertile. So for example, women becoming temple prostitutes, they had to give their virginity to Ishtar, and then only they were athar, then they were pure, and then they can get married and bear children. And with the men again, if more men have sex with each other and they produce the sperm, these sperm are smeared onto the idol Ishtar as a token of fertility, so that Ishtar can make their lands fertile, right? So clearly a constructed form of homosexuality that is motivated by idolatry. And then the cherry on top was the third one, where these two angels comes to Nabi Lut as guests, and Nabi Lut then says to them, don't you know what happens to men in this community? So the idea of stamping them out or keeping them out of Sodom and Gomorrah was to humiliate them through molestation, and so Nabi Lut wanted to protect them, right? And then Nabi Lut takes them to his house, and then eventually, because of Nabi Lut's wife going to speak to the neighbors about Nabi Lut entertaining guests, she goes and tells the community, and the whole community comes rushing to Lot's house, demanding that he should give up his guests. And the kind of words that the Quran use, like fadaha and walaqad rawada and khazia, it's all indications that this was not consensual in nature, what they wanted to do. And also they didn't want to have these men to take them for coffee. They wanted to molest them, right? And so again, another form of constructed homosexuality. So it is an injustice, and this is what these imams have to get straight. It is an injustice to use the story of Sodom and Gomorrah as a blanket condemnation for homosexuality, or for people who are struggling with accepting their innate homosexuality. And I think that point needs to be made clear.
I have to say, I agree with you on the injustice, because clearly there is a rich, complex, layered, contextual history to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And all people ever hear, because nobody's really doing any of the historical research around it, is that it's used to condemn homosexuality. The only tool in the arsenal that gets used to do that. So it's a shame that that rich history is abused like that and used in such a manner.
And I think another point, before I turn to you, another point that we also have to raise is, if we look back into our history, right, and we try to figure out at what point did Muslims really become homophobic, it was really in the last 300 years. There were many influences. The draconian laws of the British colonialists, the 377 section, that was making sodomy, or called the sodomy laws, that was adopted by Muslim countries. Malaysia had it, India had it, Pakistan had it, right? And so it was imported into these Muslim countries. And before these draconian laws, homosexuality was fairly accepted within society, right? This one. Such a shaitan. You're such a Lucifer.
A Luciferian.
So these colonial influences definitely had some impact on our understanding of homosexuality and our response to homosexuality. And then the second influence is, and which we sometimes ignore, is Salafism. Salafism has a very, they have this puritanic idea of what Islam is, how Islam is supposed to be practiced, right? And during the time when Salafism became the ideology of Arabia and then became Saudi Arabia, there was a move towards becoming very strict, in the sense that, you know, there was the idea that we should be living Islam exactly as the Sahaba, as the companions of the Prophet has lived it. And with that kind of change also, homosexuality became something that was not accepted.
Yeah.
But one of the thing that he speaks about with regards to the with higher education, that is, for me, I found the biggest contradiction was that, okay, firstly he blames higher education, he blames the education system. He says we shouldn't send our children to schools and things, to university. But then in the same breath, in the beginning of the voice note, he keeps reiterating about these lawyers that were helping him, that's part of his team, to draft these policies, right?
They study.
and I'm wondering, and these lawyers, I guess are straight men, right? Because that's what he's, I guess, referring to. These are straight men, but he keeps saying that universities make people gay. And so there's this major contradiction, and it makes you wonder about those lawyers that he's
But it's
working
not
on.
just gay. He's
Right?
arguing that higher education also makes children turn from Islam.
Yes.
Turns them into these little monsters that are going to
Yes.
treat their parents like trash one day.
Yes, exactly.
And it cause all these social problems. But I think if you're going to make that argument, you have to really kind of consider the perspective on the matter. Is that someone with a high education invented the WhatsApp that you've been sharing the voice note on.
Exactly.
Created the technology to share the pictures of the lesbian couple that you've been denigrating.
Yeah, exactly.
That studied law to help you put together the
Yes.
really draconian policy
Yeah.
that you're putting together.
And also, Western education is influenced by early Islamic education.
Yes. Exactly.
And that in that era was considered higher education. Another thing that I found interesting and also disingenuous at the same time is that he starts off by saying that we have to deal with this issue in a very compassionate way. Right? But then right through his speech, he's not so compassionate. Right? And then referring to other imams who have now gotten to the point of wanting to be compassionate towards this community and somehow finding ways of inclusion, calling these imams munafiqs, right? Hypocrites. And I think that's very disingenuous.
He's not just calling the imams munafiq, he's going after the parents, he's calling them bad parents because it's their fault. They want to give their child another education, or they might have wanted to accept their child in compassion and love. He's calling friends, tacit supporters, anybody who remotely shows any compassion or inclusion to people who are queer and practice Islam or outside of the fold of Islam now, according to this man. That's a very high seat of judgment to put yourself in.
I mean, one of the roles of an imam is to ensure that Islam remains relevant for people.
Yeah.
That Islam remains something that would nurture people spiritually.
And empowering.
And when I hear imams like this, I'm kind of wondering, like, what happened to your role of making Islam relevant, especially to a community that needs it, right? I mean, I don't think Islam is for those people who are really saved, right? Islam is for those people who are really struggling to connect with their sexual orientation. Now, with their spirituality. Now, if you are saying that this is a community that needs guidance, then provide the proper guidance for them.
And it's very ironic because he goes on about the Sunnah of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam all the time.
Yes.
But the way he represents people in general is so ugly. It's so ugly.
There is no peace, there is no compassion, there is no love in anything that comes from this kind of religion that we've heard today. You know, yet at the end of the day, if we sit down and actually ask ourselves, what is Islam? Rooting from the root salama, it's peace.
And that scares me. That scares me because there's not just Muslims listening to this.
Yes.
so many people are listening to this, and we are constantly portraying Islam in a specific way.
Yes.
The stereotypes that we are trying to break, things like this will reinforce those stereotypes.
Like probably one of my last thoughts on this guy's issue with us is how dangerous this voice note is.
Yes.
Because it's filled with generalizations, it's filled with conjectures, there's no stats, there's nothing to back up anything that he claims.
Yes.
Not even by Quranic or Sharia standards is there anything to back up the things that he's saying, and how dangerous this is for people who don't have the disposition to do personal research on issues, to dig deeper a little bit into scripture, to contextualize certain surahs or conversations that happen around them, and that this becomes fact for people like that, and the result of which could be a mob mentality that you deal with at the end of the day. There's nothing more dangerous than a mob mentality.
God forbid. I think that's a valid point, is that homosexuality is one of those topics that you cannot just address from a theological perspective.
Exactly.
You need to do your research. You need to look at it from a biological perspective, from a psychological perspective, and from a lived reality perspective.
In a few years' time, when your child is inducted into the corporate world, it is not inducted, it is abducted into the corporate world. Because when they get inducted, it is something else. Here they will be abducted because their deen will fly, their beard will fly, everything will fly from them. Because it's easy to sell your religion, because now you're dealing with mushahadat, you're dealing with money.
I'm just thinking, when I'm listening to this, the impact that this would have on a queer Muslim who are not resourceful, who are not empowered with the information that can help them to reconcile in a way that is healthy. So I would like to know, in closing, what are your thoughts? What are your closing thoughts?
My closing feelings around this is, firstly, this is very dangerous. Like a message like this being sent out to the community, to communities everywhere, is very dangerous. Not just for people within Islam, people who are struggling with their gender identity within Islam, as you mentioned earlier. It's also dangerous for people outside of Islam who are looking at us and it just reinforces that narrative of Islam being intolerant, Islam being violent, and Islam just being exactly.
We should really have these conversations and show each other. We should put our prides aside and sit for the betterment of our nation. Sit and actually discuss these matters. These are serious things that needs to be discussed. Because if a Muslim does not leave Islam because of this, then definitely a person who is not a Muslim is definitely not going to join Islam after hearing this.
I think that when you're going to do something like this, and I think Islam is very big on what your intentions are, because you can say one thing with your words, you can convince yourself of something else, but what are your true intentions? And that's something that's between you and your creator. And so to create something like this under the guise of trying to protect the deen, or trying to look after the community, or trying to keep Sharia pure, there are then better ways to do that. If you feel you need to protect the deen, you need to protect your community, there are more compassionate ways to do that without throwing members of the community you're protecting under the bus, by calling them kafir, by calling them non-believers, by calling them outside of the fold of Islam. There are better ways to do that. So I feel that the intention of this exercise, this voice note, was to cause harm. And I think it succeeded in doing just that. So I just hope that people that are listening to this of the Muslim community will be able to listen to this voice note with discernment and be able to see right from wrong.
There are so many issues in South Africa, globally. Women are getting raped, children are getting raped, poverty is skyrocketing, capitalism, greed. Yes, so many issues with that he can focus on. He can even sensationalize those. But he chooses to sensationalize that out of everything else. Why?
And that's the real question. Why obsess about this?
When they are not harming anyone.
When there's so many other real issues physically, tangibly affecting the fabric of our society.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for participating in this conversation. I think it was a very important conversation to have had. And I just want to conclude with an important reminder for us from the Quran, in which Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرَ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. That how can we rest or conclude about something or about some information in which our knowledge of it is incomplete. So let us endeavor to, in whichever topic it is, or any social problems that we are trying to address, let us make sure that we have looked at the issue from many different angles, not just the theological angle. And also, just to conclude with a dua in which Allah, in which we're asking Allah to grant us knowledge that is beneficial to us, and to keep away knowledge that is harmful for us, and to protect us from those who have gone off the path. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا ونعوذ بالله من أهل الضلال برحمته وهو أرحم الراحمين. So till next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.